So let's begin by going over what we're going to go over. This is, just like onboarding, not a linear process. All of these topics are going to be covered. They may not be covered in exactly this order because just like onboarding, they intertwine and in fact, they inform each other. But we will be covering all these topics with time at the end for questions. If there's any pressing questions, as Melissa had mentioned, feel free to type them in and we will try and get right to those. So let's just dive right in and look at the sort of big trends in onboarding. And I want to, I'll give you the chance to read these, but I want to talk about why this is happening. Why are these trends going on now? And it seems like kind of an easy question because you could see a line back to COVID, but really it's about a few things that have already been happening. The empowerment of the workforce, the globally dispersed nature of the workforce, and just a better understanding of psychology and emotional needs and inclusion. If you look at the second trend, that has changed not only in how we sort of approach employees and onboarding, but it's also resulted in change of what metrics are given the most weight. So instead of just pure productivity numbers, we're looking at things like diversity and engagement and number of connections and communication and networking. I mean, productivity still matters, but the long-term effects of these metrics are being considered more heavily. And finally, the third trend, when we're talking about ethics and AI, we see that as consumers, as employees. We see it in the marketing and the products are more focused on end users and are more employee focused. And those are being looked at more favorably, especially as employees have a more deeper understanding of how machine learning and AI and algorithms are being used in the workplace. And it's something Rebecca and I have both talked about extensively going into this.
Exactly, Cliff, thank you. I completely agree. These trends are things that we're seeing as well. In my work with customers, I've seen still the importance of that time to productivity, but also long-term retention rates and that meaningfulness of work, where the learning experience designers who are putting on the training programs are looking at how do we incorporate the aspects of community culture and connectivity in the entire onboarding experience.
Yeah, meaningfulness is a wonderful word and is probably going to come up a bit. So let's talk about what's going on with you guys at home. I'm assuming home for most of us. But how is organization, or how is onboarding working at your organization? What is it most focused on? Is it the connection? Is it purely on reducing time to productivity? Let us know. I'll be interested to see how it lines up with what we're seeing at home or from our research. But take some time. Give us a shout here. I know there's a lot of us here today, but we'll take some time to hear from you.
All right, and we have about half of the audience voted, so we'll leave it open for just a few more seconds, allow you all to make your selections before we go ahead and close the poll and share those results.
Yeah, I know that if this had been done, let's say 20 years ago, it would have been just paperwork. I'm going to make a bold prediction that would have just been the process of onboarding is just making sure that everything is filled out and you're in. But because of those trends we talked about, and again, sort of nothing new, just been accelerated, I think we're probably going to see a little more variation. I won't put all my eggs in one basket, but I think that's a possibility.
All right. A good time to close. We'll share those results.
Oh, sure enough, look at that. Understanding the company culture, mission, and values. It might have been a somewhat leading question, but still fascinating that we are seeing that cultural shift. It's not just something that is anecdotal, but we're even seeing it amongst this crowd. So that's good because that's going to be a heavy focus on what we're talking about today. So let's talk about just the whole concept of really, you know, I had mentioned COVID, but it's really an ongoing change about where workers are located. So this is just something that we're going to have to adapt to. It's not something that's going back. That's been the big question, right? Is, you know, after the pandemic, where are we going? We're still seeing that, you know, there's a massive amount that are going to be working from home. And this is because of previous forces of increased digitalization, the transition to a knowledge economy, and just generational shifts in employee values and aspirations. So this is going to cause organizations to rely on tools and processes and providers that can give them the tools that they need to give sort of safety and cultural acceptance during the onboarding focus. So we're looking at how those trends are changing, not just, you know, what's changing, but also what's staying the same. And again, it's that digitalization, a focus on agility, and a more humanized and personalized approach. So this is something that's probably near and dear to all of our hearts. What's different? You know, what's different for all of us besides, you know, having to deal with cat and dog noises? But it's nearly everything, right? There's a completely different set of stressors, but there's also some new capabilities that may not have existed too, that we need to think of as not just restrictions on how we onboard, but there's more flexibility. There's more sort of technological advancement in the tools you can use to get the job done. Admittedly, it's a struggle though to bring corporate values and culture to remote workers. Another thing Rebecca and I have talked about quite a bit.
Exactly. I love this slide because it's talking about that effect on employees, and it also reflects directly back on the effect on companies. The corporations I've worked with, they may be saving money on not paying for office space or electricity in the office spaces, but they're having to adapt all of their processes at the same time as all of their learners, all of their employees. Something that I've seen is that corporations are taking this as an opportunity to redefine their processes and to reevaluate how they deliver things as important and integral to a company culture as onboarding.
Yeah, I couldn't say it more. And we see that, you know, we had, you know, some research from just recently looking at what has the biggest impact on employee experience and company culture. And that work-life balance is probably not surprisingly all the way up there, but that candidate experience and onboarding right there too. There is one that's left off, and that's safety and security, but I think that is more or less a given, right? That needs to be taken care of before anything else. But it's understanding these effects and look at especially on the corporate culture side, because during a lot of conversations I've been having with organizations and talking about company culture, you know, they are very sort of closely entwined with what we're seeing from the research, right? It's belief in what the organization stands for, right? Those are values, you know, this is the mission. And that goes back to the sense of meaningness, to use the phrase Rebecca used, meaningfulness of being connected, of feeling like what you do matters and what your organization does matters. All right, so it's really getting to some of that you could say is generational, but that means it's here to stay. And I don't think there's anything wrong with any of that happening right now. So those are sort of the positive aspects, but there is also some negative aspects that we also have research on. And, you know, some of this probably isn't too surprising, having especially a drastic effect on attrition, both long and short term, which sometimes gets not thought of, right? But also the idea of a bad hire. And bad hires can end up being much more damaging than I think many people understand, because it's not just that you didn't hire the right person, but this could be someone who is actively disengaged, right? Not just unproductive, but actually causing harm to the entire ecosystem. And that's going to affect things like trust. It's going to affect the culture, you know, the uptick of how people get involved in the culture and how they communicate and how they connect with each other. So it's something to be very mindful of when looking at it, because this idea of employee engagement beginning on day one is not just a, you know, clever, cute phrase. It's true. All right. So, you know, you have to create an atmosphere on trust. And there's an old saying, right, that trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. So you really have to work hard to generate that atmosphere and to get more of a human aspect in what you're doing here. And so, you know, doing that involves more than just running through paperwork or, you know, telling someone that you're just trying to get them as productive as they can be, right? It's instead getting the idea of, I need to know who you are and I need to know that we can trust each other. And that can't be overstated in how important that is. It's been, you know, we see it here in holding the leaders to be accountable, you know, and looking at the effectiveness, but then look at all the other things, teamwork and collaboration. And again, that's something that often is thought of sort of down the road instead of right on day one. Now,
we did have a question from the audience. Can you differentiate between orientation and onboarding as we're going through this employee engagement section?
Yeah, I'd love to. I personally, and Rebecca, feel free to jump in, but I would consider orientation a part of onboarding. I think onboarding is a much more broad aspect that involves really getting the employee involved in the organization. Now that may have an orientation aspect to it, and it does involve paperwork as well. I don't want to downplay the importance of that. But onboarding is much more extensive. It can go into, and I'm giving you a spoiler for the next slide, but it can even go into learning and, you know, succession planning. So Rebecca, do you feel the same?
I feel the same. I see orientation as more of a getting familiar with the role, and onboarding is much more about all of those other aspects of incorporating culture and getting to know the company and who you are in this organization.
Mm-hmm. It is a great question, by the way, and thank you. And let us know if we answer that in a way that made sense. We can follow back up. So this was kind of talking about employee engagement beginning on day one, and I teased the next slide, but learning also begins on day one because of onboarding, which makes sense, right? Because it's part of instilling organizational values, cultural values, and giving employees control over their own destiny, making them feel more connected to the company by giving them a path to learn and grow at the company right from the very beginning. So you can really see the power of having this more connected, more extensive view of learning. So, you know, these are sort of the positive things that we can see from learning. Let's look now at where organizations say they are, right? Let's start from, you know, where in the process do people want to improve? And I hope that this is true for those of you at home as well. The new hire experience, right? Again, that really speaks to how they're feeling about it. But also that collaboration, right? Mentors, peers, managers, right? We talk about connections. There are formal and informal connections. There's ways to connect through your coworkers, but also more formal things such as mentors and coaches that can happen. So those are the process improvements we'd like to see. Now let's talk about what's going on with the technology that you want to improve. Well, the new hire experience, probably not surprising, collaboration and assimilation into culture. But the issue is, okay, we're kind of agreeing that this is something that is a process we want to improve, and we want to use technology, right? You want to improve your own technology and able to get there. And this makes sense, right? This is something that can't really be done manually. It kind of has to be done through technology. Even at small organizations, at least those that expect to scale, because of the amount of manual processes just aren't feasible to do in a way that would be effective. So one of the areas we talked about making those connections is in how this is done in the onboarding process. And we can see less than half of companies currently use coaching and mentoring during onboarding. They aren't making of those connections. And this can have a drastic effect. It's a both simple and complex fix, right? Because you want to be able to link mentoring and coaching during the onboarding phase. But often those are treated differently. It was, that question we had earlier about orientation, that's a perfect example. The way some organizations are set up, they are not fully prepared to sort of link two different spheres. It can be very difficult. Learning might be in its own area. Coaching and mentoring might be part of leadership development. But if you can supply your organization with the right mindset, if any of the data that we have helps, and you can use that to build a process that link the two, and you have the right tools to make all those connections, you're going to be in a much, much better shape than, as you can see, the majority of organizations that are out there. And I think that that's kind of what I want to leave you with, is this idea of, it's not just a technology issue, it's also a process and a philosophy issue. But when all of those come together, you can see great things happen. So we've talked about the research side of it and what we sort of know about how this works, but that's a lot different. That's a tell. Now we can do sort of the show side, which makes sense for corporate values and culture, talking about that and talk about how this has worked and where we've actually seen this proved out, these sort of theories in proof from Rebecca's experiences, seeing just how successful these things can be. So I will leave you in her completely and wonderfully capable hands.
Thank you, Cliff. That's a perfect lead in to what I'm excited to talk about today. I have worked with enterprise customers and corporations for over 5 years in a customer experience role. So working closely with customers in customer success, I talk with customers about what their goals are for every initiative that they're leading. What I've seen in the onboarding sphere is this trend of moving away from just clarification and compliance, really the traditional aspects of onboarding, potentially more of that orientation aspect that we were talking about earlier, which is much more about process and paperwork. It's very compliance related, of just a checklist saying, yes, I did it, and now let's move into the job. And now the trend is moving into incorporating culture and connection and community into the entire onboarding experience and combining all of that together. So if we look at the next slide, all of our customers are aware of the importance of delivering an excellent onboarding experience for things that we talked about before, of building trust and improving the employee experience. But as people are moving online, the customers I work with are always looking at maintaining the quality of that experience and establishing culture as they go, enabling those connections at scale, because I'm working with corporations that have thousands and thousands of employees. And they want to make sure people are able to connect globally, expanding that community and their supportive network. So I'm going to be showing you 3 examples of customers that NovoEd has helped deliver their onboarding in ways that have incorporated these elements, the trends that we've seen of culture, connections, and community at scale in a virtual environment. So
Rebecca, started with example 1, we did have another question coming in from the audience. How long do you consider the onboarding phase to be? Through day 30, through day 60? What does that look like?
That's an excellent question, because it varies. And it does differ historically. When you do an in-person onboarding, that has been between a week and a month for a lot of the customers that I've worked with. When they move it online, something that NovoEd learning experience designers have published in best practices for how to move an in-person training online, it's extended over a longer period of time to allow for deeper learning engagement in both practice and application. So with customers I've worked with, the online versions have been between 8 weeks and 18 weeks. It really varies, but Typically, when you move it online, it's a little bit longer because you can incorporate different elements into it.
Great.
Great question. All right, for our first example, this is a customer, Fortune 500 customer with a little under 20,000 employees in telecommunications. And they had actually run a virtual onboarding program before on a different platform. That program before NovoEd was 1 week in person, 8 weeks of digital homework, and then 1 week again in person to wrap it up. What the customer was finding before they moved to NovoEd was that they didn't have as high of engagement as they wanted, as high of adoption of their sales methodology, because this was a sales enablement program, and they didn't really have strong cultural adoption. So the challenges they were looking to solve that NovoEd helped them with was decreasing time to productivity, creating that greater strategic and cultural adoption among the sales enablement new hires, and then deepening learning. What we helped them create was a program that was actually 18 weeks. So this was one of the longer programs where there was a CEO welcome video, and that established that sense of community and standardized messaging at the very start. Previously, it had been kind of location specific, messaging maybe wasn't as consistent because everyone delivers their in-person onboarding slightly differently. So when everyone was able to take the onboarding virtually, they got the same material, the same content, and they had the strategy alignment from the very beginning with that CEO welcome video. And it seems like a very simple thing, but it's super effective with just establishing culture and strategy and vision so you can build trust and create that strategy alignment at the very start. In the duration of this customer's program on NovoEd, we also help them build in practice and application assignments and activities throughout the duration of the entire program. Participants could record themselves practicing their sales pitch, post it to a gallery so that then their peers could go in and review and provide feedback, and then the participants could review each other's work. It was a very collaborative and social environment. So we saw highly increased engagement amongst every single participant. And the customer was so happy with the entire program that they created role-specific channels. So instead of just doing channel sales at the beginning, they're now just copying that environment, swapping out some of the material, keeping the activities, and expanding into inside sales, direct sales, as well as pre-sales. Something that the admin actually didn't expect at the very beginning, but they were so excited about after they ran their first one, was just that easy ability to replicate the experience. And it saved the entire learning experience design team so much time that they didn't have to recreate just the logistics and that in-person experience time and again. They were able, with just a click of the button, to clone their onboarding process and then ramp it up for all different types of their sales team. So this one is particularly exciting for me. And in our next example, we're going to look at a Nestle subsidiary. Nestle is a Fortune 100 company. They are the top food company in the world with over 291,000 employees. So obviously scale is massively important, as well as a global audience in establishing networks around the world. In this new hire onboarding, we're looking at Purina PetCare, one of their subsidiaries, which is actually the second largest pet food company in the world with over 8,000 employees. So Purina PetCare hires about 300 people per year. And in their previous onboarding, it was entirely in person. So as with the previous case, they had similar challenges with messaging, standardization, and consistency of processes, where each location was kind of doing their own onboarding. They had their own style, and so consistency varied. What they were looking to solve really was making sure that everyone received onboarding. When they hired 300 people per year, they actually only had capacity for onboarding less than half that number. I think it was 124 people per year total out of all of the locations. So not everyone was getting the official onboarding. Of course, everyone was getting their job-specific onboarding, but there was that lack of strategy alignment and consistency of just understanding the global company messaging, the vision, mission, values. So what we helped them create was an onboarding experience that was linear and referenceable, so participants could always go back and look at it, and they could also start on day one of their job. They didn't have to wait for the in-person seminar, which previously sometimes they wouldn't be invited to until maybe a month or 6 months into their job, and the content was potentially no longer relevant because they had already started in their position. So with the NovoEd solution and the program that they hosted on our collaborative learning platform, they were able to create something that participants could start right away. It's standardized messaging because everyone got the same onboarding experience, and they incorporated some other elements that are very important for all of our customers to think about when they're moving online. Of if you're doing an in-person event, you might have icebreakers and different get to know you events. So you can still create those activities online. And this is what the Purina PetCare Learning Experience Design team did. We helped them create personalized introductory activities. The first one was a fantastic collage where participants got to post pictures of themselves and their environment. There were some questions and templates around things they could include. And then they got to comment on each other's work and get to know each other, and people found connections and were able to establish personal, more personal connections at scale, and for people that they may not have had access to or been introduced to in the previous local onboardings that were held. There was actually a second onboarding activity that I really loved, or there were a number of them, but there was a get to know your pet assignment because Purina PetCare, obviously this was critical to the entire value of the company. And participants went and did tests with their pets where they determined whether or not they were right or left-handed or pod. And they got to post their results and talk about their pets within the course, which just created greater connection overall. There were live webinars throughout the duration of the experience on the NovoEd platform with subject matter experts from the company. And throughout it, they also could participate in discussions. So they had access to all sorts of social connectivity while they were going through that orientation aspect and learning about the company and aligning on the entire company strategy. In end of course surveys, participants reflected that they were very grateful for the opportunity to meet people from around the world, and especially to understand aspects of the company culture and community, and specifically the company's strategy and direction that they didn't have access to before. So in our last example, this is another Fortune 500 company in manufacturing with 60,000 plus employees. Stanley Black Decker came to us looking to develop a sales and marketing development program. So this onboarding program was something they were already thinking about pre-COVID, so pre-pandemic, but obviously they were forced to accelerate their plans due to the pandemic. Formerly, it was entirely in person, and it was a very extensive onboarding, very hands-on because there was technical product training. This was for their sales team, and the sales team for this atmosphere was mostly recent college grads who may not have been in the workforce before. So the very traditional aspect of training was something that was expected because it was hands-on. They had to learn the tools so that they could walk in to any store and sell any Stanley Black & Decker tool. The learning experience design team was a little bit worried about kind of the potential for a culture shock of moving from that super traditional training into an entirely virtual training, especially when there was technical product training involved. Their field reps were also highly dispersed. So similar to the other use cases we talked about, there was that challenge of differing quality or methods of explaining the entire process across the onboarding locations. What we helped them create was an asynchronous and synchronous referenceable experience. So learners had instead of that in-person experience, they now had 5 weeks of mandatory onboarding, but in the flow of work. They started on day one in their job, and then they took the learning experience, their onboarding experience, simultaneously. They had check-ins, so they had weekly calls, there were webinars throughout, and with this, the learning experience design team at Stanley Black Decker really wanted to focus on layered support, layered social systems in that supportive network. They paired up all of the learners with mentors. So the mentors came in and provided feedback. There were facilitators in the course. All the participants were put on teams. They worked on team projects together. So paired together, they had to learn to interact together, whereas their roles are typically very individualized. They partnered together to provide feedback on things like their sales pitches. They had to work on projects and deliverables so that they could attain deeper understanding of their entire role and the products that they were dealing with. In addition, Stanley Black Decker provided support groups on the NovoEd collaborative learning platform where participants could go in and ask questions. Something that the participants absolutely loved about the experience was the mobile app. One of my absolute favorite examples from, or I guess stories from this experience, was how a learner used the mobile app and was in a Lowe's parking lot and completed a module online on the NovoEd learning platform. They went through their course and they completed a module, and then they walked into the store and made a sale immediately. So it's that example of being able to practice with peers and get peer feedback as well as mentor feedback, and then immediately apply what they were learning with impact and direct results. So because of the success of this program, they're also expanding, bringing more of their sales teams onto the NovoEd platform for onboarding, and even their sales leadership. So moving forward, they're very much looking at creating the foundation of their learning experience online, starting from onboarding, starting from day one, and making sure that everything is in the flow of work with those supportive networks to help at scale and with overall just strategy alignment. So that kind of wraps up the 3 use cases that I wanted to share with you today. And to summarize that, I want to talk about the best practices. So if we can go to the next slide.
Rebecca, we have another great question for you.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about what metrics these organizations used to determine the success of the new onboarding?
Absolutely. And this is an interesting one because for every single customer I've worked with, we're looking at both the before running the program on NovoEd, the metrics that they used to track of, purely time to productivity and going through a checklist, to now on the platform, something that we help customers with is establishing those metrics of activity. So engagement, social activity. So how many times are they communicating with their peers? How much are they giving each other feedback? And is that feedback meaningful? And then something that's available on the platform is what's called course completion. Sorry, the car. Course completion. So did they actually complete every step within the course? The learning experience designers can decide what milestones they want to add in for their metrics. Is it completing a team project in this Stanley Black Decker example, completing team projects in addition to quizzes or whatnot? In some of the other examples, it was completing quizzes plus specific assignments of commenting on other people's introductory assignments, watching specific videos. So the metrics people are tracking are much more about engagement as well as social connections, and those metrics can be tied directly to how many times have they commented and what was the quality of those comments, plus then learner feedback, the participant feedback at the very end. Thank you. Good question. All right. So when we are looking at those examples combined, as well as the experience I've had and my teammates have had with helping customers, especially enterprise customers, large corporations, move their onboarding online, or maybe even just adjust their already virtual onboarding, customers are trying to put culture and context at the core of their learning experience. And those onboarding experiences include storytelling, case studies, encouraging discussion and feedback, as I've described before in the examples, as well as providing those opportunities for practice and application. When we look at the next part of best practices, it's really about creating those activities that foster connections. So I gave an example of a creative icebreaker activity that really helped people open up and start communicating with other people in their program and connecting with their peers. Lastly, we have engage current employees to establish community. Something about adding in those mentors really created a sense of accountability as well as personal responsibility to their peers. So not just for proving that they were doing the activities, but giving their peers real and meaningful feedback. With this one, what I've seen customers do often is invite the onboarding class from the previous year back to be peer support or buddies, pairing people up who are in the program right now, or they could even be the mentors who are coming in. So you don't just need to rely on managers to help and facilitate a course, foster connection, and establish that connectivity by introducing your new hires to the company culture. All of our customers were thinking about moving online even before COVID. But COVID accelerated that for a lot. And because of what they've experienced in moving their programs online into a collaborative learning environment, they're now looking at, even post-COVID, how do they maintain that blended experience? Perhaps there are some aspects they would want to bring back in person, but overall, because of the massive benefits for both the employees and the companies, they're looking at how to maintain this experience online and then scale it to other departments and other teams throughout the organization. So from here, if it's all right with Cliff, I'd love to open this up for questions and just hear what is on everyone's mind.
Absolutely. We have plenty of those. So I will go ahead and get started. Rebecca, this one is for you. In the companies you've worked with, was orientation and onboarding done by different organizations? And if so, how did the multiple organizations bridge the gap and work together?
That's a great question. What I've seen with corporations is that they typically have HR deliver onboarding and orientation. And it was much more of the orientation aspect where it was a checklist of things to go through and it was very compliance related. And they might have had an external consulting agency help, which is establishing what needed to happen or the flow of it, but it was typically delivered in-house for corporations because they generally had the resources and the large HR departments in order to deliver it.
Great. There are a couple of NovoEd specific questions, so I'll go ahead and sound those off. How does the NovoEd platform integrate with existing processes, platforms, and applications? And then the second one was, how can you use NovoEd to onboard participants for a program or course?
Great question. Yeah, thank you. So the NovoEd platform can integrate with a number of different, HRIS as well as LMS systems. So if you need to integrate, or if our customers need to integrate with a learning management system for ease of enrollment, we have those functionalities and capabilities. So it is fairly straightforward. I can always send out or share with the Brandon Hall group to send out just a list of our integrations, which are on our website, but we are able to integrate with especially corporate customers in order to establish ease of entry for their enrollment process.
Great. This one might be for both of you. How much learning is too much when an employee is in their onboarding period?
Man, that's a great question. I think it really depends on the job. Kind of like the timing when we had the question earlier about how long. I think that that's the same thing. It requires different things for different jobs, and I'm not just doing a cop-out answer. I think that the learning, as long as it is varied in the type and style of delivery, it'd be hard to say there's too much. I think it'd be too much if you just said, hey, read these 900 pages. but when you have that experiential learning that Rebecca was talking about, you mix that in with self-directed learning and in different learning styles, I think that it's hard to say what isn't learning as long as the person is treating it as a growth experience rather than, oh, I've got to get through this. Rebecca, your thoughts on that?
I completely agree, Cliff. I think that there's always going to be an aspect of learning in every role. But what I've experienced with customers is that their employees are starting in their jobs day one and doing onboarding simultaneously. So it's not holding them back from starting. They get to learn while in the flow of work. And that transitions after they're very familiar with their role in the company strategy into more professional development and upskilling. So learning is continuous, but it's not either doing the job or learning. It happens at the same time.
Great. This next one I believe is for you, Rebecca, and it was in reference to your telecommunications example. How do you measure time to productivity?
As Cliff was saying, this one actually depends on the customer and their program. For sales enablement programs, it could be measured by number of sales and when they start making sales. And that really depends on when they're, allowed to, or not allowed to, but when they know the material well enough to be productive and go into stores like with some of the examples I gave and actually start talking with customers and selling. So this one, I think it does depend per customer and also type of program. Sales programs, it's a little bit easier because it's when do they start making sales and seeing the results of that. With maybe leadership onboarding, that one, it can vary depending on what type of team they're leading. So this one across the board, I think the metrics will change per team.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add was to be open-minded about the metrics. There's a lot of organizations that make the mistake of falling on, okay, this is what has worked in the past, and there's just an ability to gather more metrics now, different kinds of data, as we talked about before, ethically. But you can look at things like network analysis and inclusion and all sorts of different metrics that we just didn't have before, and just be open-minded and think about what does it truly mean to be onboarded in your organization.
Great questions. We have a few more. So going back towards the beginning, is there a difference between coaching and mentoring? They seem to be used interchangeably.
Oh, I'll take the blame for that one because they are definitely different aspects. I was grouping them together. I would call them formal connections with a sort of formal structure. Now, your mileage may vary at your organization and how you use the term, but generally coaching has that aspect of, okay, this is a sort of knowledge or a style or something that I'm going to impart, whereas mentoring tends to be a little more long-term. It will be a little more bi-directional, where you set what you're trying to get from your mentor and you have goals and they have goals as well, rather than just be a straightforward, this is how we're going to sort of, and I hate to use the term as the verb, but to sort of coach you through it. But that's where sort of coaching was more traditional, is it's a process by wherein one imparts some aspect of the job to another, whereas mentoring is more about growth and development. That's my take on it.
Great. All right, so we have a few around the same realm, so I'll just pick one and it should cover all of them. How do you suggest handling managers' expectations that onboarding prepares employees with all they need to be successful on day one?
Oh, on day one. Okay. Well, that I think that Rebecca said it earlier, because on the slides I had before, I said, learning begins on day one, and sort of those connections begin on day one, and your job begins on day one. But it's still a growth process, and it will take different amounts of time, and you're going to be looking at different metrics. I think it's worth setting expectations of milestones, about teaching them the platform and the tools so they can see what progress is being made, and an understanding of what their goals are. I think that it's sort of doing both a goal setting expectation with them as to, what do you think success looks like on day one? Because if it's, the same employee that they're going to be at day 30, then I don't think that that's a good mindset to have. But I realize you have to be a little more diplomatic when dealing with that. Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, how I've seen customers and how I've helped customers with this is including the managers and the leadership team in the learning experience design process, in the onboarding development stage where they're establishing what those milestones are that Cliff was just talking about. So setting the milestones so that they have very clear expectations of what participants should be able to accomplish, or what the employees should be able to accomplish based on what they've learned. If you don't have a section in your onboarding course until week 6 or so, then it's not realistic to expect them to be able to implement that within the first week. So including all of that in your onboarding and making sure the managers are part of it, or that they're potentially part of the onboarding experience as mentors within whatever platform you're using, including them in the entire experience will help to manage their expectations throughout the duration of learners onboarding.
Great. Are there any parts of onboarding that you feel are best delivered in person?
I'll take first crack at that because you can easily make a case that all aspects might be better delivered in person, right? We are social creatures, right? That's just how humans are. Being able to, especially in team building and collaboration and having that ability to meet each other. But as Rebecca noted in the example for, I know it's a Nestle subsidiary, Purina, it's the same dog food I use. Being able to share your pet's pictures, which I wish we could do on here, man, our numbers be through the roof. We've had the whole crowd, but that ability to make those human connections. So, there's a lot of things where if it's just transmitting information, that's probably actually better done remote, not just for safety and security, but just because it allows people more flexibility to get things done. Certainly there are aspects where you can see where having a human connection is great, but there's also some wonderful tools that we have now to have those things like sharing pet pictures and getting people feel more connected to each other without having to be necessarily in the same room. Your thoughts, Rebecca? Sorry.
Sure, yes. I think that there are a couple of aspects of onboarding that are done or that should be in person. With the Stanley Black Decker example, all of the learning or all of the participants could go out and sell any of the tools. But then there's a difference of if there's an actual tool operator that needs to practice with the tool, that should be done in person, or they should have the tools they need in order to practice that in person. So I think there are some aspects of what are they going to be doing in their job? Are they selling the tools, or do they need to be able to, perfectly construct a building or use the tools that they're selling? So I think there should always be a look at what the job responsibilities are going to be, and is it something that they can learn virtually and then practice on their own, or do they have to practice with other people? And sorry, with that other people, one more thing there. Do they have to practice with other people in person? Is it required to be a team effort in person, or can they practice online?
Right. To use a sort of extreme example, surgery, but I'm sure there are others. It's just the first one that popped up, but I guarantee you there's others. Probably airline pilots.
All right, great. Courtney would like to know, do either of you have experience with onboarding different segments of a company? For example, operations versus corporate. Do you find it beneficial to separate the two, or have both groups had the same onboarding experience?
I can answer this one. Yes, I've onboarded corporations that are looking to build out their entire capability academy. They have HR, they have leadership, they have sales, they have their success teams, they have support, they have all different teams, they have their product specific teams, engineering, internships, and all of them have different onboardings or role specific onboardings. So what I've seen customers do in those cases is have like a firm-wide onboarding course where they enroll every single person in the same one. So people are meeting people from across departments and across divisions and regions for more general things of company strategy and vision, values, mission, the most important aspects of getting to know the company and just aligning on where the company is going. And then they create kind of separate onboarding for the role specific departments.
That's been my exact experience as well. Before I did this job, I actually had to work, and I was the head of HR for a small company. And there are certain things that obviously switch, but we try to keep certain aspects the same. Certain parts of the onboarding experience should be experienced by everyone, right? They should have some sort of shared experience because that's a big part of how people connect to each other.
Great. And building off of Courtney's question, Joe commented and has an additional question. Similar to Courtney, we are a somewhat decentralized nationwide company that supports multiple functions, but looking to streamline the onboarding experience for frontline employees. The challenge is the diverse groups we support. What advice do you have for how uniform or distinct our onboarding should be depending on the group?
So the only thing I would jump in with here is that I believe, if I understood right, we're talking about global dispersion, and there will be some cultural changes that should be thought of. Different cultures have, just different ways. When I'm sort of generalizing when I talk about how we make human connections, but those can change, and there should be an awareness of that. But otherwise, I would probably say the same as what we did before. Any extra thoughts on that, Rebecca?
I would agree. I think that there are generally in an organization, there's one direction that the entire company is working towards. There's a core mission and vision of where that company is going, and generally that will remain consistent no matter where the onboarding is taking place. Something that our customers have done who have dispersed audiences is they copy the learning experience and then just change the language. And they change language for the videos and whatnot so that they can then deliver the onboarding around the world for all different audiences who speak in their native language in order to make sure that it's applicable and accessible for everyone. But really the content is pretty similar because the company is trying to, in general, align everyone with the strategy to make sure everyone's on board and working towards the same goal.
Okay, great. Let's take a look here.
And while you're looking, I'll just let everyone know that if we didn't get to your question, we will get it automatically sent to us. So don't worry, I know there's a lot of us here. We will make sure to get right back to you, whichever one of us is more appropriate to answer, or both.
Absolutely. All right, and it looks like we have time for one more before we wrap up with a quick giveaway or digital giveaway. Any tips or tricks for leadership onboarding, lessons learned?
Well, in addition to, I think, the best practices I went over of really putting culture and context at the core of your learning experience, as well as finding creative ways to recreate those in-person experiences like the icebreakers that you would have had. Make sure you build those into your onboarding, your virtual onboarding experience. Find time to create those small moments of connectivity that that would happen organically in person. Leadership should be conscious of adding those in and incorporating them into their virtual experiences. Create coffee breaks where you have breakout rooms and discussion channels so that people can connect informally, in addition to learning just the overall context of what they should be doing within their role.
Yeah, the only thing I would add in is, when we talk about getting company culture across, it's leaders who do that the most. right? They can lead by showing instead of just saying this is what our company values are. They are the avatars of that of those values, and making sure that at this time more than ever they need to be sort of hyper aware of that, that people are going to be looking to them for that sort of guidance.
Wonderful. And with that, I would like to thank you both for taking the time to join us and put on this great webinar today. I mentioned a digital giveaway. So NovoEd has just released a new complete guide to online collaborative learning for the enterprise. Use your phone's camera to scan the QR code on the screen